On the 17th of August, 1661, a magnificent coach takes the 23-year-old King Louis XIV from Fontainebleau to VauxLeVicomte. Nicolas Fouquet, the young ambitious Minister of Finance, had invited more than 6,000 guests to inaugurate his new residence. And the King of France is the guest of honor. Nicolas Fouquet is a true patron of the arts. 5 years before, he had assembled the greatest artists of France around him. Here they are, from the left to the right: the architect Louis Levaux, the painter-decorator Charles Lebrun, landscape architect André Lenôtre. This talented trio had been commissioned to create Fouquet's new residence south of Paris. Hundreds of acres of land had been prepared for its construction. The entire town of Vaux and 2 other hamlets had been removed to create enough building land. Hills had been leveled, rivers diverted. In the town of Mancy, Fouquet had built huge construction sites, a hospital for his workers, and a tapestry factory to realize Lebrun's designs. Finally, the residence had been completed, and Fouquet decided to celebrate the completion of his residence in an appropriate manner. The guests enjoyed the elegant drive to the chateau, which consisted of an avant-cour and a grand cour. Crossing the moat, the guests arrived at the Cour d'Honneur. The magnificent chateau had been designed by architect Levaux, and when the guests entered the Grand Salon, they could overlook the entire garden. First, Fouquet invited his guests to enjoy the garden. The guests were overwhelmed by the fabulous design. Look at the terrace with the geometrical designs. Look at the terrace with the mirror ponds, and then the lawn leading up to an enormous statue of Hercules. Everybody wanted to know who created such a splendid design. Fouquet proudly introduced his garden architect, André Lenôtre. André Lenôtre. His father, Pierre Lenôtre, premier jardinier des Tuileries, the supervisor of the Tuileries Gardens, introduced his son to the art of landscape designing, after which André studied with painters, architects, and students of the mathematics of perspective. For André Lenôtre, the main problem of landscape architecture was to create the space of a landscape within the narrow confines of a garden. At VauxLeVicomte, that question of space was particularly pressing, since the distance from the Grand Salon to the statue of Hercules was only 850 meters long. But by the manipulation of the base, by adjusting the proportions of the terraces, André Lenôtre had created an optical illusion of space which largely exceeds the longitudinal axis of the garden. Moreover, the experience of space is reinforced by mirror ponds which reflect trees, clouds, and chateaux. The guests were in awe. Wouldn't you? They simply couldn't believe their eyes. Walking through the garden, nymphs invite the guests to go boating in gilded gondolas. Hidden musicians delight the guests with the sweetness of their music. The inside visit of the chateau is next. Everybody admires the fabulous decorations of painter-decorator Lebrun. King Louis XIV is unpleasantly surprised when he reads the motto of his host, "How high shall I rise?" And he gets annoyed when he discovers this self-assured slogan recurring throughout gardens and chateaux. Precious prizes are awarded during the lottery with which the guests are entertained. Magnificent jewelry for the ladies. Traditional weapons for the men. In the meantime, the famous gastronome and gourmet cook Vatel is preparing supper. Golden plates sparkle on the beautifully laid tables. After supper, the party enters the garden again. Look at this! While supper was being served, a stage designed by Lebrun had been set up. All of a sudden, a huge rock near the stage opens up and turns into a shell. A beautiful nymph steps forward. With a loud voice, she orders the statues to step down from their pedestals in order to entertain the spectators. At once, a great number of statues begin to move. While the music starts playing, gods, fauns, bacchantes appear on stage in an unforgettable ballet. The ballet is followed by a comedy, which the famous author Molière had specially written for the occasion. At the moment that the guests are ready to return to the chateau, fabulous fireworks appear above chateau and gardens. Oh la la! When King Louis XIV returns to Fontainebleau, he is furious. Furious, livid. Why? A servant, not even a noble, had had the arrogance to surpass the King of France, the representative of God's will on earth, in style and in elegance. 3 weeks later, Louis XIV has Fouquet arrested. Charged with the abuse of state funds, he is locked up in a prison in Nantes. He remains a prisoner until he dies. As soon as Fouquet is locked up, Louis XIV employs the designers of VauxLeVicomte. They are commissioned to create a chateau in Versailles that will dwarf VauxLeVicomte. So Le Vaux, Lebrun, and Le Nôtre now have the challenge to surpass VauxLeVicomte, the most beautiful chateau in France. Architect Le Vaux sets to work immediately. He turns Versailles into a huge construction site, where an army of architects, land surveyors, draftsmen, bricklayers, masons, and carpenters are employed. In total, 35,000 men and 6,000 horses. First of all, he wants to upscale the modest hunting lodge, which King Louis XIII had built, by constructing an enormous envelope around the original building. Garden architect André Le Nôtre is in a crisis. The gardens of VauxLeVicomte were his masterpiece. How can he ever surpass it? More urgently, how on earth do you make a garden fit for a king? The King of France. He represents the will of God on earth. His power is boundless, his authority limitless, infinite. Boundless, endless, limitless, infinite, infinite, infinity. That's it! Infinity! All of a sudden, André Le Nôtre got the idea. Gardens are always fenced off within boundaries. By definition, a garden is an enclosed space. But now, in his design, he will break through all the limits of the garden and turn the idea of infinity into the central theme of his garden. 3 royal axes, each wider than the Champs-Élysées, lead to an enormous square as big as the Place de la Concorde. The square, the Place d'Armée, is lined by the royal stables, which house 3,000 horses and 200 coaches. The 3 royal axes join at the main entrance of the royal court, and the royal court leads to the marble court, which is surrounded by Louis XIII's hunting lodge. But the central axis of the 3 royal axes cuts through the center of the palace, continues on the other side of the building, runs between the 2 huge mirror ponds of the terrace, before it loses itself into an infinite distance. Imagine, a few years later, Louis XIV appears on the terrace behind the palace. As always, he's wearing high heels in order to mask the smallness of his stature. Overlooking the perspective of infinity, Le Nôtre explains his design. Just like the access to the palace, the garden is divided into 3 parts. At the highest level, you'll find the parterre d'eau, the terrace with the 2 mirror ponds. The middle part, the tapis vert, runs from the fountain of Latone to Apollo's pond. At the lowest level, you'll find the immense nautical cross, located behind Apollo's pond. Just like at VauxLeVicomte, though at a much larger scale, Le Nôtre manipulated the space behind the chateau. By the proportions of the 3 parts of the garden, and by the creation of a curvature in the decline of the garden, Le Nôtre's designs works like a binocular in reverse, evoking the illusion of infinity. But much more important than the technical aspects of the garden is the symbolical meaning. Garden architect Le Nôtre bows deeply. Sire, my perspective of infinity portrays your infinite greatness. What would you say? Did King Louis XIV like the design? King Louis XIV, he loved the design. He ate it with a spoon. Guests of honor visiting Versailles were always first shown the gardens. And not surprising, really. Because nowhere in France the power of absolute monarchy is symbolized and illustrated more clearly than in the gardens of Versailles. Let's pretend that we're the guests of the king. While the king will walk us through his garden, his orchestra will add luster to the perspectives of infinity, playing André Philidor's triumphal march.